Hi, my name's Dean Barlow. You join me again on the banks of the fabulous River Wye. Before Christmas we came and did a couple of videos on the use of a stick float and the whip. Today we're back again and using a deadly method, the Bolo. Yeah. So what is a Bolognese? The Bolognese is actually a rod, a very long rod which the Italians brought over, which you can use big pole floats, and it enables you to fish quite far out using a top and bottom float. It's used on these rivers like the Wye, where you can get some really positive presentation, where the fishing is good, where you need to get your hook bait down to where the fish are feeding. It's a really positive way of fishing. And to suit the positiveness of the rigs and that use, heavy ground baiting is absolutely essential to get all the fish congregated where you can cast your Bolo out and then nail them. So what I'm going to do is just cast the Bolo out. Nice sidewinded cast like that. I'm just going to put my rod on my rest, and then this is the fun bit. When you're feeding on the Bolo, because it is a top and bottom, you want to be feeding a little way down your peg so you can get your float set and then you can run on to where all the bait is landed. So if you're looking at a clock face, I like to throw all my ground bait in around about 2 o'clock. Like I say, so you can cast the Bolo in, you can get it set and it runs onto the baited area. There isn't many rivers in the middle of winter you can put this much bait in, but the River Wye is something really special. It might take you a little bit of time, a few runs through to what I always call is mapping your peg. I've got an idea how deep it is, but I'm not going to chuck a big plummet on and try and find the depth. I like to have a few runs through down and see where my last shots land, and try and map the bottom, so I can just arrange the depth to suit. Like the float went under there on the bottom, I'll just take 4 inches of depth off. And you'll find that once you've mapped your peg, the fish will always be, like I mentioned before in the videos, in a kill zone. They'll always be in a certain area. There we go. Into a first fish. And what is it? It's a chub. Nice small chub to start with. I'm not going to feed any maggots yet, so I just want to see how the fish respond, how they respond to ground bait. I don't want to, I'll put all that ground bait in on the bottom, and I don't want to start confusing the fish with catapulting maggots. And until I've found out how the fish are feeding, and a foul up roach. There's so many fish in this stretch of river in the town. Even on a cold, clear day like today, I mean, the water is absolutely gin clear. You can see the bottom 6-7 meters out in 4 and 5 foot of water. But it just shows you how many fish are in this river at this moment in time. What's this one? Another chub. The setup of a Bolognese is quite simple. It is actually quite crude. The idea is to get a big float that you can control, sometimes in the middle of the river. So no fancy shotting patterns are needed. On this rig here, this is a 4 gram Bolo, which suits the depth that what the peg is. It's about 7-8 foot deep. 4 gram I think is perfect. Obviously you've got to take the flow into account, because with a Bolo the idea is you have quite a big float on, so when you hold it back, it doesn't drag back towards you. If you're using a stick float or a Waggler, if you stop the flow, it would come towards you in the flow. With a Bolo float, because of all the weight that's down, it tends to keep in a nice straight line. And when you're catching lots and lots of fish, it's just a more simple and easier way to present your bait. So it's a 4 gram Bolo. I've got a 4 gram Olivet, 2 number 8s, and 1 number 8 on a snap link swivel, which will help with the line twist. I'm going to be fishing 2 and 3 maggots on a hook, really positive, on a size 14 to 0.14 hook length. I can move these shots around if I was thinking that the fish want it a little bit more precise. I can move these shots around to wherever I need them. I can move the Olivet up if I think the fish are taking it on the fall, and if it gets really good, I can clump it all down. Reel line, nothing too thick. When you're trotting floats, you don't want thick line. You want it to pull straight off the spool, nice and easy. So 3/2 float fish, which is about, I think it's 0.16. It don't get any more simple than that. The actual rig I've made on a winder. The rig is made up on 0.20 line, so I can keep it on the rig, and if need be, I can change my float if I feel like I could get away with a lighter float, or even if I needed a larger float. I've got different rigs made up in my bag where I can just bite them off, put them back on a winder, then get another one out. So many fish out there at this moment in time. Not had a Dace yet, which is surprising. I thought there'd been a few more Dace, but it seems like we've got these nice little chub. I think I better net that one. That's probably about £1, that one. It's just nice to see, being from someone who grew up on the River Trent that was synonymous with weights of chub in the early days. They're very few and far between now, so to come to a river that's got this many chub in, it's a bit of a pleasure, to be fair. One of the questions I do get asked is, with Bolognese fishing, is how do you actually cast it? Well, the best thing about a Bolo, you've got quite a bit of weight on the line, so you can actually swing it overhead and cast it in. But if you can see today, the banks above me are quite steep. But also, I think a side cast is better because you get the right presentation when it hits the water. The river's flowing that way, and with a side cast, I can get the weight, the Olivet, to land that side and the float above. So everything is going in the right direction. So I just have to mend the line once, and then the float is on its way through the peg. So nice and easy. I just hold my hook like that, my hook length. I open the bail arm, and then I put a nice bend in the rod. And it's just a matter of flicking the rod and letting the weight do the work. So it's a nice just flick, and just before it hits the water, finger on the spool, everything lands absolutely perfect. And as I said, as the Olivet landed first, the float was behind, one mend, and you're fishing. So it's quite simple. It does take a little bit of practice. But it is my favourite my favoured way of casting the Bolo out. Just put 2 more maggots on again. So a little tiny bit of tension in the rod tip. Give yourself plenty of space at the side here, and it's just a nice flick. And just before it hits the water, finger on the spool, 1 mend, and that's ready, already going down the peg and into a fish straight away. It's so important when you're fishing a top and bottom flow. When I mean top and bottom, like a stick float has 2 rubbers, a pole float has an eye and rubbers at the bottom. It's very important on a flowing river for it to land straight. That means the river's flowing that way, the weights want to land there and the float there, and then you're already on the right presentation. If it goes in that way, your float's going to be facing the wrong way and it has to cock all the way round, and I think you lose presentation doing that. So that's that 1 mend of the line, and then you're fishing straight away. It's just about being more efficient. You don't have to be the fastest angler. You don't have to be the fastest angler in the country, but I think efficiency is key. You can see why lots of people come and fish this river. I mean, even today on an absolutely freezing cold day, there's people fishing up and down the river enjoying this magnificent sport. And it doesn't have to be that expensive. The tactic I'm using today, a couple of pints of maggots, 3 or 4 bags of ground bait, is all you need to catch an absolute net full of fish. At the start of the session, you saw me put 8 balls of ground bait in. Some people might ask, 8 balls of ground bait in the middle of winter? But these fish are ravenous. They eat everything you put in. And the best thing about ground bait, you can get a lot of bait into the peg really quickly, rather than just feeding maggots. I always start with ground bait, because I think once you've started putting maggots in, you can't go back to putting ground bait in. I don't know why, it just don't seem to work. But with fishing a Bolo and fishing right near the bottom, dragging the bottom, so it makes sense to put a bait in, like ground bait, that sits and puts a carpet on the bottom. As you can see, I've caught quite a few fish already, and the fish have been actually, you can see the ground bait in the mouth, they're really eating it. So you've got to keep an eye on when you would need to top up. So if you go through the swim with you're catching fish regularly, then all of a sudden there's no fish, I would definitely be thinking of putting another couple of balls in. And just keeping it readily topped up. Ground bait wise, in this ground bait, I'm just using Proactive with crushed hemp. Crushed hemp is an absolute. Oh, we've got one round there. Crushed hemp is an absolutely fabulous addition to the ground bait. It gives it like a milky texture, and there's a hell of a lot of food content in there. But when you're mixing crushed hemp, when you get to your peg, what you've got to do is put it into a container and soak it. As soon as you get to your peg, you want to soak it, because it floats. As it comes out of the bag, it floats. So you need to soak it and then mix your ground bait as normal, and then add the two together just before your session starts. You can see there, you can see all the hemp and goodness in there. All that attracts these really hungry fish. So if I feel like I've not had a bite, or I've gone through my peg a couple of times and I've missed something, I'll have no qualms about putting my hand in the bucket and throwing another couple of balls of ground bait in. These fish are so hungry. They're in this town stretch, and there's so many. I mean, a chub that size, what's that, about 8 or 9 ounces? You see the size of its mouth? That can get a lot of food in there. And there's not just one or two of them. There's absolutely loads out there. So you've got to keep in touch with your feeding. It's only like when you lose feed as well, you've got to see how the peg responds. And then make your decisions how much to feed and when. So the Bolo, or Bolognese as its original name is, it seemed to have just appeared on the English scene, but it's been around on the European scene for a long, long time. The first time I ever heard of it was in the early 90s on the World Championships on the River Wye. The Italians turned up with these massive long rods, up to 6 meters in length, fishing really deep water where other teams had to fish a slider, which is a bottom end only float. They was catching fish that wasn't available to other tactics. They could fish 5-6 meters deep with big floats, control it in the flow. And since then, I think we've refined it a little bit, because a Bolognese rod is a telescopic rod with big eyes on it. But the problem with living in England, the weather, if your rod gets wet, because there isn't many eyes on there, the line used to stick to the rod. So over the years, tackle manufacturers have made longer rods with proper match eyes on, which means that you get the best of both worlds. So, like we do in England, it was the Bolognese. We've nicknamed it the Bolo. And it is a wonderful way to catch fish. It's so positive. You're using a nice big float. When you're fishing a Bolo, you can usually put quite a bit of bait in. It is a really positive way of fishing. Not just a ground bait method. Sometimes you can catch fish by feeding large amounts of maggots. But it's just about getting your hook bait down to where the fish are feeding as quick as possible. And also the float, there's more floats available. When, like I say, when the Bolo was first introduced, half of the problems was getting the floats, but there's so many readily available now. And like I've said before, we make them up on winders and store them just like pole floats. So what's happened now is I've had 2 or 3 run-throughs where I've actually foul-hooked a couple of fish, and I'm not getting the bites in the same place as I was before, which means the fish are starting to drift around the peg, maybe looking for some more food. So that is the sign. That is the sign to put some more bait in. So I'll cast the float out, just so I know the right distance. This is a very sticky ground bait, so you only need 2 squeezers and you're ready to go. So two of those. Hopefully we'll get the fish feeding back again. In any types of fishing, it's so important to get the feeder right, whether you're fishing for 5-pounder fish or 50-pounder fish, the feeding is the most important thing. And usually the fish tell you when they want some more bait, and even when they don't. But on rivers like this, where the fish are, there's so many fish, you really have got to feed them. There we go. As soon as I put some bait in the peg, they're back lined up again. In match conditions, you can get a situation where you're not feeding enough bait, and the guys above and below you are, they will just take your fish. So you've got to keep in control, in contact of the fish that's in your swim, and you've got to try and keep them in your swim. But if they're not happy, they're not eating enough food, they will drift off and go and find food. So to round it up, the Bolo is a magnificent way to fish. Fishing a big float. Oh, my first Dace. Look, absolutely pristine fish. The Bolo is a very, very positive way of fishing. It enables you to fish a top and bottom float quite the way out, even in windy conditions, because the weight keeps it on line and on course. And on its day, it's unbeatable.